It begins not with a lie, but with a whisper, a seed planted softly in the fertile soil of attention, where truth and fiction blur, not through violence, but through subtlety. Imagine a field of minds, vast and boundless as ocean tides. Across it moves an unseen hand, sowing words, images, and ideas carried gently by the wind. You do not notice the planting, only the harvest, and by then the fruits are already yours to eat. There is an art, an ancient art, to the framing of a narrative. It is neither new nor accidental. From the moment humans held language in their mouths like fire, we tempered truth with persuasion. The thoughts of others were clay to sculpt, stone to carve. But what we perfected across eras of conquest, empires, and revolutions has found its apex, or perhaps its nadir, in the luminous screens where our eyes now gather. The flickering frames of modern media, a battlefield of ideas, a labyrinth of reflection and distortion. Pause now and consider this. When did you last form an unbidden thought? Which of your certainties were born without interference? The answers likely elude you, as they do for most of us. Media, news, advertising, story, spectacle does not tell you what to think, not overtly, not anymore. Instead, it builds the lens through which you see. It crafts the angle, lays the frame, and places its weight on the scales of your reality. What remains is the illusion of choice, an unspoken conviction that you arrived where they wanted you to go all on your own. History has not been kind in revealing these secrets. It prefers to bury them beneath the shimmer of progress and the haste of modernity. But if you dig even a little, you unearth the architects of influence. There is Edward Bernays, self-proclaimed father of public relations, a man who took the raw insights of Freud, his uncle, and wielded them as tools of mass persuasion. It was Bernays who rebranded cigarettes as torches of freedom during the 1920s, seducing women to the image of independence while corporations counted their profits. It was he who orchestrated coups not with guns but with ideas, fashioning public opinion itself into an army. The term propaganda, once too crude, was swept aside, swapped instead for public relations, a softer word for the same unwavering force. But it isn't just the past that speaks. It is now. Every advertisement you see, every headline that pulls at your fear or your hope, designed to anchor itself not in your reason, but in your emotional marrow. The secret weapon of influence is not force, it is repetition. The human brain, for all its staggering complexity, answers repetition the way stone answers water. It erodes, it shapes, it submits. Show the same message 50 times and a curious thing happens. A shift. The first exposure feels like intrusion, the 5th a suggestion, the 20th a truth, embedded so deeply you mistake it for your own. What the architects of narrative know and what they exploit is that repetition doesn't merely form belief, it creates familiarity, and familiarity is comfort. From comfort comes trust, and with trust, the door to manipulation swings wide open. Neurologists will tell you this is the brain's efficiency at work. Familiar patterns are easier paths to follow. Your mind, a constantly expanding forest, burns a trail each time data repeats. By the 10th or the 100th pass, what once demanded thought now feels innate. Like watching a river carve its way through stone, the repetition of a message feels inevitable. And so the question emerges, if the river carves the stone, who decides where the water flows? The answer, of course, lies everywhere and nowhere, in the newspapers slotted neatly outside cafes each morning, in the advertisements blinking on subway walls, in the nightly rhythms of televised crises wrapped in the symmetry of glass desks and solemn voices. It lies in images you see so often they cease to be noticed. A smiling child clutching a fast food burger, a flag rippling alongside the words, "Support our troops," a celebrity holding a product bathed in soft light. These are no accidents. These are carefully composed notes in a great symphony of influence, and we are the audience who mistakes the sound for silence. Consider for a moment the strange marriage of war and media, the peculiar tango between chaos and the lens through which it is framed. Wars are not won by weapons alone, but by the narratives built around them. The same media that sells cars and cola finds its second life as the proselytizer of conflict. Notice next time how easily advertisements morph into mottos of mobilization, how the language of commercialism seeps into the rhetoric of war. Trucks aren't sold, they're an extension of your patriotism. Defense budgets aren't debated, they are lifelines for your security. And when the storm of chaos arrives, remember this: the chaos was not always there. Before every panic, every adrenaline spike of breaking news, there was stillness. But stillness is unprofitable. It does not compel clicks or ratings. Chaotic visuals, stirring music, the booming cadence of anchors, these craft an environment where fear thrives. What you see on your screen isn't the story of the world, it's the story of what sells. The truth, if you dare to hold it, is that media molds not just stories, but the landscape of your mind. And in that molding, it chooses your enemies, exalts your heroes, assigns your values, inflames your insecurities, and amplifies your desires. Like a magician skilled in sleight of hand, it distracts with one story while sliding another into the edges of your vision. What is worse, that the framing exists or that we rarely question it? But there is more to uncover. To see its full machinery, you must dive even deeper into the blue-lit abyss, into the echoes of our psychology, into the malleability of memory and the fragility of trust. For the media does not only frame narratives, it frames us. The human mind is a theater, but we rarely realize who writes the scripts. The stage is vast, the props ever-changing, and the audience, ourselves, rarely notices that the play has already begun. As we sit in the darkened rows, transfixed by the scenes flickering before us, we don't see the hands behind the curtain, adjusting the lights, arranging the spectacle, crafting the emotional crescendos. But they are there, carefully setting the stage for thought and belief, shaping the very way we interpret the world. The genius of this machinery lies in its invisibility. Framing is not a brick wall. It's a window pane so clear, so unblemished, that you mistake it for open air. It hides in plain sight, sculpting reality while passing itself off as neutral and objective. Imagine for a moment a photograph of a protest. The camera snaps, freezing a fraction of a second, but the way it frames the shot is anything but impartial. Tight focus on a raised fist suggests righteous defiance, while the same shot, zoomed out, might reveal chaos and disarray. Cropped differently, the scene may exclude the peaceful march behind that single clenched hand. A solitary lens decides how you remember that moment, yet the illusion persists that you're seeing the truth. You are not. You are seeing a decision. Media thrives on these decisions, on the subtle craft of limiting what is shown and silencing what is not. It is not a manipulation of facts, but a curating of context, so seamless that most will never sense the absence. the ignored crying child on the outskirts of a war zone, the dissolving disconnect between cause and consequence, between the action and the system that called it forth. What they do not show shapes you as powerfully as what they do. And we, drowning in a torrent of images, articles, hashtags, and talking points, make the final mistake. We assume our exposure is comprehensive, but imagine the bookshelves that house the chapters of the world's story. The media lets you read only a page, and yet, rarely do we stop to ask, who chooses that page? Who draws the borders of the photograph? They say history is written by the victors, but nowadays it is written in real time by unseen editors who pluck the strands of global events and twine them into something saleable. New York, London, Tokyo. Behind the faceless names of agencies, networks, and bureaus are people, individuals armed with notepads and editing software, constrained not by truth, but by time and profit. The 24-hour news cycle, relentless as an ocean tide, hungers not for depth, but for speed and salience. A moment of deliberation feels like years in the shadow of its appetite, and so decisions are made not with care, but with urgency, bereft of nuance and layered in sound bites. But the stakes go deeper, because beyond the speed lies the narrative, and in the narrative lies power. Governments, corporations, institutions all understand this, though they rarely say it aloud. They know that reality itself is pliable under the press of well-framed stories. This is no conspiracy. It is far more banal and therefore far more dangerous. When political leaders hire public relations experts, when billion-dollar companies spend millions on ad buys to soften their public image, when think tanks quietly brief reporters to guide the day's framing, these aren't separate threads. They are cross-stitching the fabric of perception. Take, for instance, an age-old tactic: rebranding. Look back to the mid-20th century, when corporate and national interests discovered the critical intersection of media and emotion. Consider the oil companies facing mounting backlash as early warnings of climate change began to surface. They didn't deny the science outright, they framed it, funding studies, seeding doubt, and masterfully creating the perception that the issue was uncertain or debatable. The truth was obscured not through falsification, but repetition, dripping doubt like a slow-ticking clock until audiences turned away altogether, weary of imagined ambiguity. Meanwhile, in glossy spreads and televised commercials, oil made you think of sunsets, roaring highways, energy independence. This wasn't deception. This was framing. Clever, seamless framing that buried urgency beneath layers of comfort. Expand the lens again, and you see these tactics at scales both grand and intimate. Think of how wars find their footing in public consciousness. History is riddled with examples. Governments actively courting the favor of the media, staging events, carefully controlling access, language, and images to steer the tide of public sentiment. Black and white propaganda posters from the world wars urging you to enlist and protect your nation have evolved into televised bombing campaigns with slogans like shock and awe. The aesthetic has changed, but the intent remains eerily consistent: to manufacture consent, to iron caution into compliance, fear into action. Pay attention to the images you've been shown before every major conflict of your lifetime. Do you remember the footage of crumbling walls, of burning villages, of nameless screaming faces? Do you remember the ready-made horrors snapped expertly into neat 30-second clips? Were those scenes untrue? Number but The choreography around them was deliberate. What we are rarely told is this: those evocative photographs, those human tragedies shown up close, are meant to tap the perfectly human parts of you, your empathy, your outrage, your sense of justice. But their invocation is not neutral. It is aimed to turn those human emotions into something actionable, something political, something that feeds the voracious engine of agendas most of us will never fully understand. The machinery turns fast, outpacing our ability to question it. Today's atrocity is tomorrow's forgotten hashtag. Between algorithmic curation and an ever-narrowing attention span, you forget the stories you consumed days, even hours ago. But media doesn't forget. It remembers how to press on the exact place where your attention flickers brightest and your resistance is weakest. This is why repetition works, why the same slogans, the same talking points circle endlessly, confident that you will fold under the weight of saturation. Each iteration is a drop in the ocean, and eventually you no longer notice the water. But there's another piece to this endless weaving: language itself. The power isn't just in what's shown, it's in the words chosen to frame it. Advertisers don't sell you a chemical concoction, they sell you happiness in a bottle. Politicians don't raise taxes, they create revenue enhancements. Armies aren't sent into foreign lands, we export democracy. Words are weapons, their sharpness honed to shape perception. Euphemisms, metaphors, even the cadence of a sentence, all of it crafted to slip past your defenses without you realizing the deep shift in meaning. And so, as ads morph into wars and politicians borrow the tools of marketing executives to craft foreign policy, the line between truth and persuasion dissolves further. But the real threat is not immediate. It is slow, like ivy growing over the windows of your mind. Inch by inch, it crawls, until one day the light you thought belonged to you is colored entirely by the vines. The question isn't whether the frame shapes us. It does. The question is whether we can still see the outline, or if we've mistaken the frame for the world itself. The most dangerous thing about a frame is that you forget it's there. The world beyond its borders becomes irrelevant, invisible. What we cannot see and what we are not shown ceases to exist in our perception. That is the final triumph of carefully curated narratives, the erasure of alternatives, the obliteration of context. The boldest act of control is not telling you what to think, but narrowing the horizon of your thought so that certain questions, certain doubts, never even occur. Does the fish know of the ocean? Does it sense the current that dictates its movements? Or is the current simply reality, undeniable and unquestioned? So it is with us. Our beliefs, our values, our identities, they are not strictly our own. They are shaped by the waters we swim in, the endless narrative streams flowing from the wires, the screens, the headlines. Look closer. Can you trace the current? Or has the ocean erased its outline, leaving the sublime illusion that you are simply seeing things as they are? A celebrity scandal breathes for months, consuming oxygen while deeper, systemic tragedies lie buried. Why? It is not that the media ignores life's complexities. It reduces them, prioritizes them, packages them. And we, without realizing it, live by those priorities, mistaking them for our own. The invisible hand points, and our gaze obediently follows. But where exactly is it pointing? Ask yourself who benefits from the story being told. Not the journalists penning it. They are often closer to pawns than kings. No, The benefactors of narrative framing are those who hold leverage in the game. Corporate interests, political regimes, those entities for whom public opinion is not just an abstract concept, but an economic or tactical weapon. Think of industries whose survival depends on your fear, your loyalty, your distraction. The military-industrial complex, its tendrils embedded across the globe, thrives not on peace but on the perpetual promise of war or the suggestion of imminent threat. If it doesn't exist naturally, it is conjured. Terrorism, separatism, cybersecurity, borders, constructs drafted into headlines, turned over and over until they feel less like issues to solve and more like fundamental laws of human existence. Or consider the pharmaceutical industry, whose advertisements are barely distinguishable from personal salvation narratives. The grieving man renewed by a pill, the vibrant family restored by an injection. These are not merely products. They are symbols of control over an uncertain body and an unpredictable life. Yet these commercials rarely end with solutions, only seductions. There is always one more prescription to consider, one more malady unnamed until now. When they tell you to ask your doctor, they are not just framing the benefits of their drugs. They are framing reality itself. You are inherently fragile. Your body is broken. Authority lies in their hands. It is not evil in some cartoonish form. It is power in its most banal, insidious expression. Power succeeds best when it doesn't announce itself. If manipulation requires no deceit, if all it takes is omission, emphasis, and emotive resonance, then the line between persuasion and control vanishes. This is the perfect crime of modern media. To flood us not with lies, but with choices. To inundate us with curated truths so carefully arranged that we fail to grasp the limitations they impose. And repetition, ever present, solidifies the illusion. Hear a story enough times, and it gains a weight that feels gravitational. A government whispers freedom long enough, and its wars wear halos. A corporation repeats sustainability until we forget that their profits are rooted in depletion. Repetition instills trust, trust builds belief, and belief becomes culture. A culture maintained even when its origins are forgotten. It lives in our sayings, in our instincts, even in the subconscious rhythms of our thought. It's just the way things are, we tell ourselves. But is it? Or have we been swimming in the same current long enough to forget the stillness of another path? The tragedy, though, is not only in what we've missed, it is in what we've become. The endless barrage of stories, advertisements, headlines, sound bites, they do not simply inform us. They erode our capacity to reflect. Saturation replaces comprehension, and our attention spans flicker like dying bulbs. Think of how you read the news today. The headlines scroll by, the summaries are terse, the analyses pre-digested. Yet even this grazing feels exhausting. Our mental real estate is too crowded, too noisy to linger. Reflection requires space, but the architecture of our modern media ensures that space is fleeting, if not entirely absent. And therein lies the most profound impact of narrative framing. It doesn't just shape what you think, it changes how you think. They remind us that the frame exists, that the story we are sold is a story nonetheless. And in that awareness lies hope. Hope that we can step back from the screen, away from the overload, and reclaim the stillness required for thought. To listen, not to the loudest voice, but to the whispers between the noise. to trace the outlines of the frame, to recognize its construction, to remember that reality itself is far messier, far more intricate than any headline will allow. The media does not have to be an enemy. It can, at its best, illuminate, educate, connect, but only if we remain vigilant, only if we refuse to let our minds be colonized by repetition and convenience, only if we demand more than stories built to seduce and manipulate. The unseen hand may plant the seeds, but we choose whether to let them grow. And in that choice lies our greatest power, not to escape the frame entirely, that may be impossible, but to step outside it just far enough to see the glass, the limits, the carefully drawn borders. To widen the lens and ask the questions no one has asked us to consider. That is how we reclaim our perspective. That is how we remember that the world is not just a stage, and we are not merely its audience. We too are storytellers, and it is time we wrote our own scripts.